If you're a leader out there, everyone on your team is not motivated in the same way or by the same things, nor do they have the same goals, even if they're all doing the exact same position. Whether you're a middle manager, an individual contributor, or an executive, knowing those values is really important to then knowing where an environment aligns or diverges.
Welcome to the Learn It All podcast, the show for today's leaders who want to get ahead and stay ahead because we believe great leaders aren't born or made, they're always in the making. I'm your host, Damon Lembi, two-time best-selling author and CEO of Learn It, a live learning platform that has helped upskill over 2 million people. In just a moment, I'm joined by Angie Callen, executive coach, podcast host, speaker, and the founder of Career Benders, which helps people grow into their full potential. I'm going to ask her to share how do you create your own individual growth plan, why authenticity is more than just a buzzword, it's a performance tool, and how to find purpose, not just pressure in your role. So a recent study showed that 64% of employees say they trust a robot more than they trust their managers. What do you think that says about human leadership today?
Are you in my slide decks? Because I literally put that in a slide deck for a team building retreat I did a few months ago. And it's pretty astounding because I'll throw another stat on that to just kind of reinforce and lead into what I think it believes or what it shows about us is that in exit surveys, I believe it's 75% of people cite the manager as the reason for leaving a job. And we've heard that kind of more people leave a job because of a manager than the company or the work a ton. And I think when you put that all together, it means that people are not being led the way they really want or need to. And managers and even companies to some extent aren't closing that gap or working proactively to figure out how.
So what is that gap then?
I think there's a lot of layers to that gap. And in my opinion, one of the more prevailing or substantial components to it is the generational piece of the workforce. We have more generations in the workforce than we ever had. And I believe we're in a time when the differences in generational tendencies and affinities is greater than it's ever been, which means we've got this huge disparity between a baby boomer who is likely in a leadership position or a management position and a millennial or a Gen Z who is at an entry level or a rising professional. And those two groups of people, we haven't even addressed the fact that then there's your good old Gen Xers in the middle of their creating more chaos. But if you look at those two kind of bookends, there are drastic differences in generational styles of communication, work ethic, what having a life means, and all these different kinds of things. And millennials and Gen Z make up such a significant component of our workforce that they can essentially demand certain work styles because they won't go work for companies that don't have them. And so if you're not keeping up and adapting to the changing needs and demands of the workforce, you're going to maintain this gap and this disparity between the way we're leading people and the way they want and need to be led or motivated.
And the Gen Zs and the younger generations, it's only going to get more and more over time. So exactly like you just said, I mean, we have to learn, grow, and adapt to start learning to meet these needs. And also, when I was on your show, we talked a lot about this, the importance of authenticity. Where does that fall into it when it comes to how people want to be led and by whom?
You know, I'm kind of mad that authenticity is now a buzzword because it was my platform and my favorite word before it became one. So I'm just going to throw that disclaimer out there. But it's funny that you brought that up now because in the back of my head, I'm sitting here thinking, I think that's one of the pieces of the gap. So we've got the generational ecosystem creating this environment where there's a gap. And the older generations took to leadership styles that were very autocratic, control-driven, and weren't really authentic to who those people probably are. It was just a position and a posture that they assumed. And in that comes this kind of rub, because also if you are trying to lead and manage in a way that isn't your natural disposition, it's going to fall flat because it takes a ton of energy from you. You're not going to be able to genuinely connect with people because I believe there's a little 5-letter word at the root of all of this, and it's trust. Trust is at the core of all relationships, and we know work relationships, we spend more time with coworkers than we do sometimes our romantic relationship partners. And if you can't build that trust, then you're not going to have a great team dynamic. You're not going to have good retention. And if you are trying to lead out of alignment to your strengths and to who you authentically are as a human, it's harder to build that trust because people can see through it.
And do you think that people tend to not be their authentic self because the organizations demand so much of them that they demand perfection?
Oh man, are we going to go down the perfectionist rabbit hole next? Perfectionism, I think, is one aspect of it. I'm actually going to go even broader than that. It's that I think there's maybe two things. I never only have two things, but we'll just start there. One is that I believe people think they know what they need to be doing instead of just doing it naturally, right? So they're like, oh, I need to micromanage in order to be able to make sure my output from my team is perfect, for example, right? Instead of saying, I hired this person for a reason, I'm going to trust that they can do the job and output kind of what I need. And so they try to force and control and tight grip stuff a little bit more than they need to, because the flip side of that is either that's the expectation that has been set, or that's the expectation they assume has been set because it was the societal norm of autocratic style leadership until 10 or so years ago.
All right. So now that I came out of the gate strong with authenticity and perfection and everything, let's take it back a step, because I think you got a very unique story yourself. So share with us about your career trajectory.
Well, in a nutshell, I'm a recovering engineer who loves people.
Does that mean that engineers don't love people?
Most engineers don't love people. I think that's a generalization I have as a former engineer who does love people, I'm allowed to make. And really what that means, and to be honest, my career story goes way back to college. When I even just chose to become an engineer in the first place, I was a top performer in my high school. And didn't have a very clear affinity for a career, which I remember being very self-conscious of at the time. And my dad, who was my high school math teacher for 3 years for all of the accelerated math classes, said, Ange, you're good at math and science. Why don't you go to school to be an engineer? So in all of my research of engineering disciplines, I chose civil engineering because it's the one where you get to talk to people the most.
What was it like having your dad as your math teacher for 3 years?
It was actually really fun. Because I was good at and liked math, so that made it easier. I think it would suck to have a parent who taught you a subject that you didn't like. And and I say was because he's retired. He's still here. I was actually just with him a few days ago. And he was a fun teacher, but had good discipline and a great teaching style that I think I have taken up some of as a coach and a mentor and a trainer myself. So as a teacher, it was great. Having your dad as a hall monitor when you're a high school student doesn't lead to very many dates or a big social life.
Yeah, that would be, he's always around the corner, you got to be careful with that.
There were no field parties when Angie was a teenager.
So you go from being an engineer and then you get into, I believe, even managing like a gallery for a year, and then leadership in a nonprofit space to where you're at now. So let's talk a little bit about where you're at now.
Yeah, there was definitely a little bit of there was like 10 years of career tumbleweedness in there. Because, I studied engineering. I went in college and I went and did it for a while, always knowing it wasn't going to be what I did forever. And I was fortunate to kind of get pushed up the ladder into project management because of the people skills. And then civil engineering got completely wrecked by the recession. And that's when I chose to leave, and I, did some random things. I ran an art gallery. I mean, I did a bunch of random stuff. Art gallery, sold advertisement for a parents magazine. I am a 44-year-old woman who still does not have children. So that was an interesting experience. And I think in hindsight, I was exploring. At the time, I was just taking every door that opened. And I think that planted some of the seeds that led to the career coaching work that I started doing when I started my business. Because I think a lot of times we can put like really hardcore blinders on and say, okay, here's a career goal I have 20 years down the road, but we miss an opportunity to either get there faster or better because we don't look at doors. I think maybe I was open to lots of doors and just kept kind of going through them and seeing where the next one took me. And eventually that landed me in this place that I feel like I was meant to be, and all of those random experiences in that journey gave me the foundation and the perspective to kind of start a coaching business.
And looking back on your days as an engineer and maybe even working in an art gallery, what skills did you find that were most transferable to how you're able to help serve your customers today?
Well, and this is where I think there's the foundational piece of like everything is preparing you for the place that you're kind of meant to be and the purpose that you're meant to fill. Because the engineering work has a lot to do with the way I show up and coach people. Analytical. I'm a direct communicator. That tends to resonate with technical professionals who also feel I can understand them and their introversion, typical introversion, even though I am not one. And so that helped me really carve out a niche working in the technology space. But at the same time, working in an art gallery was my first exposure to small business. And so some of those skills came in from the entrepreneurial perspective, as did, being an executive director of an organization, a small organization, and having to like keep all the plates spinning. That's also where developing programs and curriculum and figuring out how to deliver information in a way people can digest it, all came to life and really did create a foundation to prepare me to show up the way I do in a coaching engagement.
And I think you and I are lucky and even unique in the way that we both kind of found our passion. Me, it's completely different. I've been here 30 years and I just went all in and I loved it. And you found it through going through door after door after door. But a lot of people, Angie, never find their passion in work. How do you help unlock that for them or help them find the job that they can't wait to go to in the morning?
Before I can tell you how, I think we have to address why most people don't, and that's because most people don't seek. Right? We live in a societal kind of we're at this weird shift, and this goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning with the leadership gap. Right? We are in a shift in corporate and workplace culture, and older generations, if you are middle-aged, my age or older, you're kind of still used to you go have one or two jobs and do this one career track. Younger people are like, they might have 10 jobs by the time 10 careers by the time they're 40. And so we're in a shift where there is more space and more options to lean in and explore what you can do as your vocation than there ever has been before. But most people don't take the risk to do it because they assume they're going to fail. Now we can talk about perfectionism. And that fear keeps us small, when in reality, you can look at the big picture and say, what's the worst case scenario here? I try something, I don't like it, I can always go back. And that starts to get into the how. So the first is why we don't, which is mindset. And the fear and the societal expectation that you stay small, you stay mediocre. The how is starting to push against those norms and and be curious, have a curiosity mindset and a willingness to explore. Try something. You can start small. You don't have to go all in like we did. I cut the cord and I went all in, but there's a ton of different ways to kind of test things out, even if it's a stretch assignment in your current role, right? You have more control and agency over your career trajectory than you think if you choose to take it. And therein lies the exploration into more purposeful, meaningful work.
Well, one thing you said right there is really important is, your career agency. First of all, I was having this conversation with somebody today who's in a leadership role and wants to get back into being a regular salesperson, right? And he's been kind of waiting around for his leader to say, hey, so-and-so, do you want to go back into, I'm like, nobody has more control over their career than you do. So you have to take that initiative yourself. You stay in the organization you're in, but go back, have a conversation, especially since you're a high performer. Now, with that being said, how do you help people maybe not pull a ripcord all the way, but maybe give an example of somebody who's had success, dipping their toe into something, and then eventually making a big pivot?
Yeah, and I want to respond to that story you just told. Not only does no one has more agency than you, but also no one is going to advocate for you in your career the way that you will, even if your boss is your best friend. And so, don't sit around and wait. Does that mean you become a squeaky wheel? There's a fine line between annoyance and persistence, and you need to ride it. And if you feel like there is more out there for you and you want to dip a toe in that water, there are a lot of different small things you can do. I'm a big fan of journaling, as funny as that sounds as a former engineer. At the end of the day, write down what went well or what the highlights were of the day. start tuning into what you enjoy most, what gives you energy versus what depletes energy, where you feel most excited, passion projects or hobbies that you love, and where that could potentially intersect skill set. So, a lot of it is tuning in to things that are happening around you every single day and amping up the awareness into how they impact your mood, your energy levels, because now you might be onto something that you could say, "Ooh, okay, I realize I am more energized when I am talking to clients about sales instead of trying to motivate a team. Maybe that means I need to go this direction versus this like leadership direction." And then you can start thinking about ways to implement on that.
And so what I hear you saying is, okay, doing things like journaling, we were writing things down and saying, hey, this is something I enjoyed, and it's something you can go back and reflect on. So eventually, I guess you could make those cross based off this is what I enjoy doing, and this is something where I can make a living out of.
Yeah, I mean, now we're talking the good old ikigai, which has got like 8 buckets. So Godspeed if you want to try to explore that one yourself. But I think the point is one, the reflection word is an excellent word to bring to this conversation because we are so distracted and so consumed with busyness that rarely do we even give ourselves space to reflect. I'm a mountain. We live in the mountains. We do all the adventure things. And I talk a lot about how powerful that can be too, getting to know yourself a little bit more. And I think that that's kind of where this starts and giving yourself the permission to take that reflection and then being curious about what those reflections tell you and where they can lead you. Because, for instance, I've had people who are like, you'll ask the dream question, right? If you could do anything, you had to work, didn't matter what skills you had, what money you make, what would you do? And they'll say, oh, I would have a gluten-free bakery. That's my answer to that question, by the way. I just like to ski too much to have a gluten-free bakery. But, okay, so maybe that's not the right application of the interest. However, I could work in supply chain at a food company. I could be in food sales, right? Depending on the skill set overlap, you could find a way to tap into that interest area without taking a giant departure or as big of a risk simply because you were willing to ask the question and explore a little bit.
There should be some responsibility when it comes to the leaders themselves to understanding what people's strengths are and pivoting them in that direction. Let's talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah. This, I think, takes us completely back to where we started the conversation. So, way to
Good.
bring it full circle because that therein is part of the gap, right? Is that, and I experienced this as a young female engineer before there was a lot of awareness around women in male dominated environments of just, I mean, I remember having a boss who used to call and leave me voicemails on my office line because we didn't have cell phones then. And he would be like, it was Boston. Hey, what are you doing? Working banker's hours? And it was 7 a.m. And he wants to know where the hell I am, right? Like that kind of stuff doesn't, and I had worked until 9 p.m. the night before, right? That's the kind of stuff that doesn't necessarily cut it anymore. And those high expectations. But the big thing is uh, lacking individuality in how you get to know your team. Because everybody on your team, if you're a leader out there, everyone on your team is not motivated in the same way or by the same things, nor do they have the same goals, even if they're all doing the exact same position. If you've got 10 sales guys, they all might be doing the same job, but they have 10 different goals and 10 different priorities and 10 different ways they're motivated, or at least 5 of each, right? Old school leadership mentality in my mind was just uniformity. Treat everybody the same, assume they are all motivated by money, assume they all want bigger titles and more responsibility, and we're good to go. When in reality, that is not the mainstream way people want to grow in their careers anymore. Some people want to learn and get subject matter knowledge. Some people want to work on more interesting projects or higher complexity. Some people do want the money and the title, but I think one of the most simplest things you can do as a leader of people is get to know them individually and understand what makes each one of them tick and operate with that level of individuality.
I agree with you. You're speaking to the choir with me on that, but there's probably some leaders out there they're doing the math and they're saying, look, I got 10, Angie just mentioned there's 10 people on the team and they're all different. That would take a ton of time. Do you have any exercises or examples of what they can do to accelerate that learning about their different team members?
Yeah, and here's the tricky thing that I'll get on a soapbox for a second is that yeah, that takes a ton of time, but guess what? Newsflash PSA, that's your job. And while corporate America, especially if you have a manager position and you're in the middle right now, you're feeling the tightest squeeze because your job is to lead those people and do hands-on work and manage the expectations and to do 12 other things. However, your priority should always be the people because they are your best asset. They are the most expensive to replace. And if you can empower them to work individually, they will actually end up taking less of your time. So there's the reason why this is, there's our case, our business case. And I'll give kind of two answers to the question of like how you can actually manage this. If you are taking over a new team, stepping into a new role, promoting and taking over a team, your first 30, 60, 90 days should be only about getting to know those people. And in the first month, just sit down with every single one of them once a week, with the group once a week to get the dynamic, understand, and ask. There's the biggest piece of advice I can give is ask. How do you want to grow in your career? Most leaders don't ask that very simple question. That's not hard and doesn't take very much time.
And I think we might have even discussed this when I was on your show, but ask and listen and not think that assume that everybody wants to just move into leading and managing people, because it's not for everyone. And people can be promoted for technical ability, and you got to be really careful with that.
Yeah. And I think we were talking about the fact that there are some companies, I won't call it an emerging trend. However, there's some level of awareness, maybe it'll become an emerging trend around this idea of like, let's say, technical growth tracks where you can grow up into being like, a senior VP of a subject versus having to be a senior VP of 5 teams, a $5 million P&L, and all of the stress that comes with that. Because, to go back to the former engineer who loves people, because a lot of engineers don't love people, are more introverted, they don't now have natural leadership skills. And that's no knock on anybody because we're all different and we need that diversity. But when you push somebody like that into leadership because it's the expectation or the only way they can grow, you're setting them up for failure, especially because most companies don't come and backfill that skill gap and upskill and train that leadership. And so by giving them a place to grow, they have a way to be motivated that plays to their skills, and you've left space for the people who naturally do want to go lead people. And now we've just streamlined the whole bottleneck.
Leading into a lot about what you talk about, work-life integration, if you proactively are doing that, you're going to proactively reduce the stress and overwhelm that comes into play by having people in the right spots at the right time.
And if you do that from the highest level, it's going to trickle down, and you're streamlining and you're alleviating sticky points and resistance, all the way down. Whereas if you're that middle manager who does think this way and wants to lead this way, but your tiers above you don't, you're sucking up even more of the stress and trying to deflect even more off of the team below you than if you were in a situation where you were more equally yoked and working with a company who shares those values and sees all employees as individuals. And that comes back to how important it is to work for a company who has that kind of culture that aligns with the way that you want to lead and or work.
And so that's something we see all the time here is overstressed middle managers. If somebody walked into your office or, virtually, and they had that issue where they want to be led that way, they want to lead that way, but they're stuck in an organization that doesn't allow them to, how do you coach them in that situation?
Oh, I've done this. And here's the thing. There's it ends up being, I hate to sound like a Debbie Downer here, but the spoiler alert is it rarely works out in the long run. Because I've even gone so far as to do leadership and like team building retreats. Like I literally went to France to do one of these, and it didn't stick because that manager really wanted to do this and they had some buy-in from the team, but ultimately the culture above was never going to adopt anything that happened. And so there is, if you are one of those managers and you come to me, we have to look at what's happening both ways. So there is a certain level of managing up, or managing expectations or advocating for those needs so that the work that you're about to do to impact the people below you has the best chances of success. And so, I usually attack like low-hanging fruit from the bottom and from the top, as weird as that sounds. So that we chip away at it from an executive level of trying to kind of impact culture and make space for that level of individual impact we know we can have by meeting our people and our team members where they're at.
I don't think it sounds weird. What you're saying is you want to attack the low-hanging fruit up above on the executive level. Like, what is one little difference you can make there? And then turn around and see for the team that you're managing or leading, what's another thing in that area so I can get a win there and get everybody a little bit closer at the same time.
Yep. Yeah, and like first actions on that front would be sit down with every single one of your direct reports and have the exact same conversation of, hey, where would you like to go in your career? Where would you like to go here? What motivates you? What are you happy about? What do you think we're struggling with? And then you encourage if you're in a 2-tier situation, you encourage each leader under you to have the exact same conversation. So you are getting to know everyone below you, no matter what tier they are from you, at a one-on-one level, but then creating that same culture with any sort of tiered leaders you may have below you, while you go up to the senior VPs and the executives above you and say, hey, you wanted me to come here and change this team culture. Here's what I'm doing at the team level to do it. Here's what I need from you in order for this to actually have a chance of sticking.
So you mentioned that is one of the frustrations that you hear your customers having. What across the board, is there one specific thing that you're seeing that's the most challenging for your coaching clients these days who are in a leadership role? Let me just add that one.
And I was going the leadership direction.
Okay,
I
good.
think
We're on the same page.
the plight of the middle manager is probably number one or close to number one. And the second, which is an offshoot or a cousin of that struggle, is meaning in their work. Especially because once somebody gets to a leadership level, they're typically at a stage of their career where they have awareness and skills, and maybe they've created some life options for themselves to get to this point of like, wait, do I want to do the same thing I've been doing for the last 15 or 20 years for the next 15 or 20? Or do I want to do something that's more aligned, more integrated with my life, more meaningful, more purpose driven? And so they start to kind of open their eyes to that level of curiosity that we were talking about on, is there more? And I think that the struggle and all of the hats middle managers have to wear triggers that sometimes. And then I also think that sometimes the lack of meaning makes that role kind of more of a struggle bus, which is why I think they're so closely related, as well as it being a similar stage of career for that awareness to come.
Does any of it play into that they get to a degree where they're, successful, but they lack the confidence to make the jump and try something new as well?
You know what's funny about that? So Career Benders it'll be 8 years old next year.
Congratulations.
And, thanks. And for like 5 years, our tagline was inspiring confident professionals. And the reason was every single person I talked to, whether they were a new grad coming out of college trying to figure out where the heck to start their career, or, a senior executive who had worked in the same company for 10 years and wasn't sure they were worth anything outside that company, all brought up the fact that they weren't confident in their next move, or they weren't confident in their marketability, or they weren't confident in interviewing or telling their story. But it all came down to this like lacking confidence around some key area of worth.
So how do you help them with that? Because what I can hear you saying as well is that maybe you've gotten to a place where you haven't interviewed in such a long time, or you haven't had to jump anywhere in a long time. So you might be super successful, but there is that anxiety that has to go with going back and trying this for the first time in a while.
Well, and we do that anytime we have to step out of the comfort zone. We know all those memes. Growth doesn't happen outside of the comfort zone. But I'll tell you, that is a really common story I'm hearing right now because I work with so many people in the tech sector. Most people, engineers, CTOs, haven't really had to job search in their entire career because tech's been on a hiring tear for 15 to 20. And now it isn't. And so they have to understand job search strategy. They have to go through multiple interviews for different positions. They're used to apply for 25 jobs or wait for a recruiter to call me, have 3, 4 interviews, and I get an offer. And now that isn't the case. And so there's a lack of confidence in even how to play the game, or even what the process looks like. And so kind of helping them understand that, and build a new skill set around it tends to help close that gap as well. And, I think that this is one of, if we want to have a coaching commercial for a second, I think that confidence building is one of the benefits of any type of coaching, whether it's career, executive, leadership, or even life. And it's because you get an unbiased third party perspective into your world that can help create some validation, right? You can go sit down and write a resume for yourself, and it will feel like the most egotistical thing you've ever done, and it will be mediocre at best. I can take that and apply the strong language that I see in your experience, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't know I could look like that on paper. And you accept it because it was given to you versus you having to kind of identify it yourself. And there's a lot of strength and confidence building in that kind of mirror that you get through a coaching engagement of many different types.
Now, do you ever run into a situation, though, where you get a relatively senior executive who needs some confidence building? They write a resume or something like that. They come to you, but then they're awful at receiving feedback?
Every coach on the planet has had a client who's not coachable. And in a way, that becomes a coaching moment, because if they don't take feedback well in an engagement with somebody like me that they may be paying for, if the company's paying, that's different. That tends to, because they're not as invested, they don't have as much skin in the game. It tells you a lot about how they may be showing up in the workplace. And so that's an opportunity to coach self-awareness and say, because rarely are you successful if you just say, hey, you're not taking this feedback well. That's really not going to lead to a constructive conversation. However, trying to create some awareness around maybe why, or the fact that they are having a hard time taking constructive criticism, will help them disarm a little bit, because it's very likely they don't even know what's happening.
And that's the point I was trying to get you to, because I've seen it myself, just in people I mentor, where they just really lack self-awareness and they don't even understand how they're presenting themselves. How do you help individuals like that become aware of how they're showing up?
Oh, so can we go back to all the way about the robots statement at the very beginning? This is where human to human connection is so critical. And this is where I get on a soapbox about the future of coaching is human. AI and ChatGPT cannot coach you. They might be able to mentor you. They can certainly train you, but they can't coach you into levels of self-awareness, because they can't ask thoughtful questions to help you pick up on insights you don't have, right? AI, robots, or even just going through your everyday is not going to uncover what is hidden to you. But thoughtful questions like, well, tell me about a time you did succeed at that. If somebody says, well, I can't do it. Well, tell me about a time you did something new. And they're going to go, oh, I learned how to mountain bike 2 years ago at the age of 42.8. You're going to go, okay, well, you did something new. How did that make you feel? Really bruised and battered and bloody, but it made for good LinkedIn content, right? And so there's the idea of like bringing up past experiences that prove it. Receipts. Bring the receipts, and the evidence can be one way. Or challenging them to say, like, what's the worst thing that's going to happen if you approach a meeting in a different way? You might feel awkward and it might fall flat. And then you're just going to tell everybody, okay, hey, I tried to approach this in a different way and it didn't work, but hey, we tried, right? You can always, it goes to this idea that you can always go back, but you can't always go forward.
Why can't you always go forward?
Well, if you keep yourself stuck, you can't.
Right. No, definitely. No, definitely.
Yeah.
How is, speaking of backwards and forward, how has your career as a executive coach evolved or changed over the last 7 years?
That's actually, how when people are like, that's a good question. This is actually a great question for me, because that has become a lot more aware. I am more aware of that now. When I started coaching 7.5 years ago, I really went at it with this idea of being a practical, tactical, outcomes-based coach. Really what I was doing was mentoring, training, and consulting. I was telling people, here's how you do this. Here's the resources that you need to do that. And throughout that work, what I really found I enjoy doing is helping people, helping humans build confidence, build self-awareness, and actually coach them and using coach type tools to invoke that while guiding them through the practicality of a process and still getting an outcome. But they leave with not just an outcome, but a greater sense of self-awareness, self-worth, self-confidence. And that's a toolkit I think I had and have very naturally, but hadn't exercised to build the muscle until I was actively in it and doing it. And now in hindsight have realized that's what I actually love.
And can you share a quick example of taking somebody who really lacked that self-confidence, self-awareness, and you've kind of brought them forward and they've come across as a whole new, better person?
I'm actually going to tell a story about a really good friend of mine who's another coach. Because, I do a lot of executive coaching, but because I love
Is it our
business,
mutual buddy, Jason? No?
it is not,
Okay.
but I would love it to be. Jason, if you're listening, I got lots of ideas for you, and you know it.
Yeah.
It's a fellow career coach of mine who about 2.5 years ago, I started coaching in business. And at the time, he was handling sales calls really transactionally. And he knows I talk about him all the time. So, Mark, if you're listening, I'm talking about you. He was handling the sales calls really transactionally. For instance, you would call and say, I need a resume. And he would just start asking you resume questions right there in the sales call, to the point that he could pretty much do a resume intake in a 20-minute sales call and then spit out a resume in like 3 days, which was fantastic for efficiency. But he was selling $400 or $500 products in a very transactional way. And this guy is also not a former engineer, but also a fellow like people lover, great communication skills. And I'm like, you're not using your best asset. So we totally changed how he approaches the calls, and he approaches it with curiosity, getting to know challenges, and not taking it as face value of what the client is saying they need, but more like, okay, what are you actually trying to kind of do here, and giving them that solution. And it completely changed not only his business, but his confidence, to the point of literally today, he texted me with this giant big business idea that he's been trying to figure out for like 2.5 years. And he's like, I've been trying to figure out who I want to focus on, and I want to focus on this niche. And I've been trying to do this for so many years, and now I have it. And it was because he's built confidence through this idea that like he can serve people in a really meaningful way and not this transactional way. We had to build the confidence and the approach in order for him to do that. And now not only does he have this like big, awesome business idea, but his business is like 4 times bigger than it was 2.5 years ago, because he's approaching it authentically as well and not stifling who he is to just meet a basic need, but using everything he has to really help a human.
Yeah, what it sounds like, again, is going from being transactional, building resumes, which he can do in his sleep, to actually keep pushing it and finding out what they really need and where it can really help, and doing it in an authentic way to focus on, like kind of almost niche down and focus on what's going to make them better. So with that being said, at Career Benders, who is the ideal ICP perfect client for you to work with? Because it can't be everybody.
No, I have 2. And actually we've talked about them both. So on the executive leader, probably a technical professional who has either just moved into or is in a technical leadership environment, really trying to build culture, build their individual skills, and feel like they're in alignment with work and life, right? Let's not have that executive existence be all of you, but complement. And being authentic within all that is one side. The other side of that coin are coaches who really want to thrive in business and leverage their authenticity to provide a human to human service, again, to help people, feel like they're living and working with that same alignment and authenticity.
Going back to the first group, the executives who want a work alignment, life alignment balance, what are like 1 or 2 things they might come back to you and say, Angie, that you've helped them with or become more successful with?
Yeah. Executive presence would definitely be one. Feeling like they can walk in a room and communicate and operate and feel like they have the executive value and contribution that they do. And then the second is I think it would be around their culture and being able to really establish a team dynamic that is what they want it to be, and they had that level of influence.
If you had to add a third one that had to do with non-work related stuff, either fitness or nutrition or just personal, what would one of those be?
Any type of executive leadership takes a substantial amount of time. Let's just not, you're not going to be Tim Ferriss as a C-suite. Sorry. No 4-hour work week as a C-suite. It's just the nature of the beast, but it's the meaning behind that time that makes you feel like you get a little bit of life back, because it's not stealing your joy. It's not stealing your energies, and you are proactively making time for the things that kind of refuel you. So again, there's that integration. I don't think work-life balance is a thing, because that suggests it is a status quo or a state that we can reach that is never, ever going to happen. The scales are never going to be like this. There's always seasons, there's always projects, there's always something going on. But if those things can complement each other, and when you need to focus on work, you do, and then there's time to focus on life when you can, that's where people start to feel like, I got my life back. This work has meaning. I'm willing to give the time towards it because I've gotten the trade-off of feeling like it's purposeful.
I'm in agreement with you. I mean, you got to know that going into it, that there's no perfect work-life balance, and it might scale at different points in your life. Now, going through your website, you have a bunch of great free resources. What are one or two great free resources that could really benefit that middle manager who's stuck right now?
My favorite's the core values. If you haven't gone through a core values exercise ever, you certainly should. If you haven't gone through one in the last 1 to 3 years, it's worth revisiting. Because whether you're a middle manager, an individual contributor, or an executive, knowing those values is really important to then knowing where an environment aligns or diverges.
I love that. And I want to recap kind of what we've discussed. We've discussed so many things. We talked about how people trust robots more than they trust humans. And a lot of that has to do with lack of connecting and not being authentic, plus all these different generations across the workforce. And how it's important. I love what you talked about, being curious and having doors open for you and going for them and thinking about, look, if it doesn't work out, I could always go back and try it again. But you don't have to go all in, like you said, without having a backup plan, right? So there's always a way to make that work as well. And it's been wonderful. What is one more piece of advice you want to leave our listeners with?
I want to revisit and reiterate the fact that you have more control and more agency over your career than you think you might, and you owe it to yourself and you deserve it to explore that.
I love it. Very important. That was a big theme. Where can our listeners connect with you at?
LinkedIn is my platform of authority. It's where all antics occur. So head on over to LinkedIn. I'm just Angie Callen, and Damon and I are connected. So easy way to find it. And if you're curious about coaching, you can find me at careerbenders.com or themoderncoach.co.
Angie, you're awesome. And listeners, what I want you to do is I want you to think about a friend or a coworker, maybe somebody who's a middle manager and they're stuck and they're not doing anything about it and they're miserable, and send this conversation to them. Or if you know somebody who maybe could use a little help when it comes to authenticity, send them this conversation, because they'll get value out of it as well. And until next time, everybody, do me a favor, stay curious, keep learning. Have a great day. Thank you, Angie.
Because one of the tells, if we could use a Vegas expression, of a strategic mind is you're trying to see how different ecosystems connect to each other and affect each other.